So in 1996, the United States sailed two massive aircraft carrier strike groups right up to China's coast. I mean, the American military basically navigated the waters around Taiwan with total impunity. And Beijing was furious, but they could do absolutely nothing but watch.
Right. They had no counter to it at all.
Exactly. But today, if the United States tried that exact same maneuver, Chinese military strategists believe those, multi-billion-dollar carriers would be resting at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean within a matter of hours. So how did we get here?
Well, it is the most rapid, consequential, and frankly, just the most staggering shift in the global balance of power of our lifetimes. I mean, the headlines we read often fixate on a stray balloon or maybe a single aggressive jet intercept. But the sources we're looking at today reveal something just far more profound.
Yeah, it's not just random aggression.
No, not at all. This isn't random, sporadic stuff. It is a highly calculated, multi-decade chess match. And it's driven by geography, by deep historical memory, and really a systemic overhaul of how war is waged.
Welcome to this deep dive, everyone. Today we're getting into the third installment of our geopolitical series, The Coming Contest: China, America, and the Future of World Power. And our specific focus today is the military rivalry: armies, navies, and the Pacific.
And we really have a heavy-hitting stack of sources to guide us through this.
We do. We're looking at strategic playbooks like Elbridge Colby's The Strategy of Denial. We've got incredibly detailed hypothetical invasion scenarios mapped out in World on the Brink by Dmitry Operovich and Garrett Graff.
Plus some deep historical analyses, right? Like Graham Allison's Destined for War and Kevin Rudd's The Avoidable War.
Right, exactly. So our mission for you today is to figure out exactly how the Pacific Ocean became the most dangerous military theater on Earth. And, whether this great power rivalry can actually avoid ending in a global catastrophe.
To even begin answering that question, we have to look at the catalyst. Because for decades, the dominant narrative in the West was all about China's economic miracle.
Yeah, the manufacturing boom.
Right. Under Deng Xiaoping in the 1980s, the doctrine was famously, hide our capabilities and bide our time. So economic growth was just everything. In fact, military modernization was actually dead last on Deng's list of priorities.
Wait, so what broke that mindset? Because you don't just go from putting the military at the bottom of your to-do list to building the largest navy in the world by accident.
No, you don't. Two massive psychological shocks hit Beijing in the 1990s. The first was the 1991 Gulf War. See, before Desert Storm, the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, was essentially this massive human wave-style land army.
Right.
They relied entirely on sheer numbers and mass to just overwhelm an enemy.
It's sort of like a heavyweight boxer stepping into a ring, just assuming that because he weighs 300 pounds and has this massive reach, nobody can knock him down.
That is the perfect visual. But imagine that heavyweight boxer steps into the ring, throws a punch, and suddenly realizes his opponent is a sniper sitting half a mile away in the dark.
Cool.
Yeah, that sniper was the United States military in Iraq. The Chinese brass watched in absolute horror as the U.S. decimated Saddam Hussein's forces, which, by the way, was a massive battle-hardened military in just a matter of weeks.
Just completely dismantled them.
Completely. And the U.S. did it from the air, using space-based GPS navigation, stealth bombers that radar couldn't even see, and precision-guided munitions that could literally drop down a ventilation shaft.
Which is crazy to think about. And the sources mention that Chinese planners literally referred to this as American magic.
They did because, to a military reliant on infantry and unguided artillery, a stealth bomber coordinating with a satellite to drop a laser-guided bomb is practically science fiction. They realized instantly that their entire defensive playbook was obsolete.
So their size wasn't an asset anymore.
Exactly. It was a liability. They were just a giant, slow-moving target.
And then the second shot comes just 5 years later, which brings us back to that 1996 aircraft carrier story I mentioned at the start.
Right, the Taiwan Strait Crisis. China was firing test missiles into the waters around Taiwan to intimidate the island ahead of an election. And President Bill Clinton responded with this overwhelming show of force, sending those two carrier battle groups into the region.
I can imagine how deeply that must have stung in Beijing. I mean, if you read into the historical context provided in our sources, it really dredges up the century of humiliation.
Yes, exactly.
Which, for those who don't know, is this period in the 19th and early 20th centuries when foreign powers, the British, the French, the Japanese, continually subjugated imperial China by arriving on ships and dominating them from the sea. So having American carriers just sit off their coast and dictate terms was this visceral historical nightmare playing out in real time.
It was, and it forced a vow within the Chinese Communist Party. Basically never again. They realized that economic power meant nothing if they couldn't physically defend their sovereignty or, their surrounding waters from American intervention.
So let's fast forward to President Xi Jinping taking power. He inherits this military that has been trying to modernize, but according to the sources, he was absolutely appalled by what he found.
Oh, completely appalled.
Rampant corruption, generals essentially buying their ranks, and a force that he openly stated lacked war-winning capabilities. He didn't just increase the defense budget, did he?
No. He instituted a massive structural teardown. He purged the corrupt officer class. He actually shrank the standing army by 300,000 troops.
Whoa.
Yeah, he realized that modern war isn't about how many boots you can put on the ground. He poured vast resources into what Chinese strategists call informationized warfare.
Okay, wait. I want to stop you there because informationized warfare sounds like a corporate buzzword. What does that actually mean on a physical battlefield?
Well, it means the speed of the kill chain. In traditional warfare, a scout sees a target, radios a commander, the commander consults a map, orders an artillery unit, and eventually a shell is fired. That takes a lot of time.
Right, it's slow.
Very slow. Informationized warfare uses artificial intelligence and these vast networks of sensors, satellites, and drones to automate that whole process. So the system spots an American ship, AI instantly calculates its speed, trajectory, and the optimal weapon to destroy it, and then feeds those coordinates directly to a missile battery in milliseconds.
That's terrifying.
It is. Xi Jinping recognized that whoever processes information the fastest wins.
And the weapons themselves changed too, right? I mean, the PLA rocket force was elevated to an equal standing with the Army and the Navy, and they started building these anti-ship ballistic missiles, specifically designed to target American aircraft carriers.
Often referred to as carrier killers.
Yeah.
And they also built long-range missiles dubbed Guam killers, intended to strike the massive U.S. logistics base in the Pacific.
Right.
And here is a critical detail from the intelligence reports we reviewed. Xi Jinping actually moved up the official timeline for China to possess a world-class military. The original target was 2035. He bumped it up to 2027.
2027. I mean, that is terrifyingly close.
Yeah.
But I have a massive logic gap here that I need you to fill in.
Okay, sure.
We're talking about AI kill chains, hypersonic missiles that skip along the edge of the atmosphere, and stealth fighters. So why, when I look at the news, are we seeing satellite images of Chinese ships dredging up sand to build these tiny artificial islands on random coral reefs in the South China Sea?
It does seem a bit contradictory.
Right. It seems like 19th century colonial outpost behavior in a 21st century missile age. Why did these little specks of rock actually matter?
I understand the confusion, but it is actually the physical manifestation of a military doctrine called anti-accessory denial, or A2AD. You really have to look at the map from Beijing's perspective.
Okay.
China feels geographically claustrophobic. They are boxed in by a string of islands that strategists call the first island chain. This runs from Japan in the north, down through Taiwan, the Philippines, all the way to Indonesia. For decades, the U.S. military has operated freely just outside and sometimes inside this chain right off China's coast.
So the artificial islands are a way to, what, push that perimeter outward?
Precisely. By dredging up sand and pouring concrete on places like Mischief Reef and Fiery Cross Reef, China is creating a great wall of sand.
But wait, I have to push back on that. An American aircraft carrier is essentially a floating nuclear-powered fortress surrounded by destroyers. How does a dredged-up sandbar actually threaten a carrier strike group?
Because that sandbar isn't just a patch of dirt. It is an unsinkable platform for deep penetrating radar, surface-to-air missiles, and airstrips for fighter jets. Think of each island as projecting this massive, invisible dome of threat.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and when you have several of these islands, those domes overlap. They create a physical no-go zone. The radar on those islands acts as the eyes for those carrier-killer missiles located back on the mainland. So if a U.S. carrier sails into the South China Sea, it is instantly tracked by multiple overlapping island radars, making it incredibly vulnerable. They're denying access to the area.
And they're securing this area using tactics that don't even involve firing weapons, right? The sources detail these gray zone tactics.
Right, gray zone operations. They're designed to push the envelope aggressively, but stay just barely below the threshold that would legally trigger an actual shooting war.
Like using civilian ships.
Exactly. China uses massive fleets of maritime militias which look like civilian fishing boats but are state-directed, and heavily armed Coast Guard vessels to swarm disputed reefs. They basically bully Philippine or Vietnamese ships out of their own waters. And there's a stunning example in our notes where Chinese ships literally dumped massive quantities of human excrement into the waters near contested reefs.
That is wild. I mean, it's basically biological harassment.
It really is. It degrades the marine environment, exhausts the neighboring coast guards who have to deal with it, and asserts dominance, all without a single bullet being fired that the U.S. could use as a pretext to intervene.
And the goal of all this?
The ultimate objective is to push the U.S. military presence all the way back to the second island chain, which runs from Japan down through Guam to Australia. They want to completely neuter America's ability to project power into China's backyard.
Okay, so I see how the South China Sea acts as this massive defensive buffer. But if you look at the map of that first island chain, there is a glaring, massive linchpin right in the center. The place where the American and Chinese security perimeters violently collide. Taiwan.
Taiwan is the absolute center of gravity in the geopolitical universe right now.
And I want to pull a scenario from World on the Brink here because it completely shattered my preconceived notions of what a war over Taiwan would look like.
It's a sobering scenario.
It really is. The authors lay out a heavily researched hypothetical invasion set in the year 2028. And my immediate thought was D-Day, right? Thousands of landing craft hitting the beaches under heavy fire. But the scenario they describe relies heavily on hovercrafts racing up a river. Why hovercrafts? Why not just hit the beaches?
Well, because a D-Day style amphibious landing in Taiwan is virtually impossible due to the geography and the weather. I mean, the Taiwan Strait is a treacherous body of water. It has incredibly rough seas and high winds for a large portion of the year.
And the beaches themselves?
That's the other issue. The western coast of Taiwan, facing China, consists largely of shallow mudflats. Traditional heavy landing craft would get stuck in the mud miles from the shore, making the troops sitting ducks for Taiwanese artillery.
Which explains the river assault. The authors describe Chinese Yushin-class amphibious ships moving up to the maritime border, but instead of boats, they launch hundreds of transport helicopters to seize the port of Taipei from the air.
Right.
And simultaneously, these fast, air-cushioned hovercrafts, LSKs, skim right over the mudflats, bypass the coastal defenses, and race directly up the Tamsui River.
Yeah, the Tamsui River cuts straight through the coastal mountains directly into the heart of Taipei. Those hovercrafts can deliver heavily armed Marines into the government district in under 15 minutes.
That's incredibly fast.
It's designed as a decapitation strike. You bypass the grueling beach fight entirely, secure a deep water port, capture or eliminate the political leadership, and force a surrender before the United States military can even mobilize a response.
It really highlights a terrifying geographic asymmetry. For China, Taiwan is less than 100 miles off their coast. They can use the entire massive Chinese mainland with all its factories, rail networks, and air bases as this invulnerable logistics hub.
Exactly. While the United States would be fighting an expeditionary war roughly 10,000 miles away from its own homeland, the U.S. would have to rely on a few fragile, heavily targeted bases in places like Okinawa and Guam, and vulnerable tanker aircraft trying to refuel fighters midair over the Pacific.
So distance is the real issue.
The tyranny of distance is America's greatest enemy in a Taiwan scenario.
And, we have to inject the perspective of the people actually living on that island. Reading through the intelligence reports and broader analyses, you hear the voices of Taiwanese officials who feel incredibly caught in the middle of this superpower staring contest.
Wow.
They are actively extending their mandatory military service. They endure constant cyber attacks and airspace incursions from the mainland. But at the same time, some senior leaders in Taipei worry aloud that Washington might be turning China into an imaginary enemy. They fear being dragged into a devastating clash simply because American and Chinese politicians need to look tough for their domestic audiences.
It is just an agonizing position for Taiwan. They absolutely rely on American weapons and deterrence for their survival as a democracy, but their economy is deeply intertwined with mainland China. If a war breaks out, the U.S. and China might suffer economic damage and naval losses, but Taiwan itself would be physically destroyed.
Which brings us to the elephant in the room. Let's play devil's advocate here.
Okay, let's do it.
If Taiwan is this geographic nightmare to defend, if a D-Day landing is impossible but a decapitation strike is plausible, and taking the island is a non-negotiable existential mandate for the Chinese Communist Party, why doesn't the U.S. just let it go?
It's a fair question.
I mean, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a listener in Ohio or London or Sydney. Why should they care about risking World War III over an island thousands of miles away?
That is the most important question of this entire deep dive, and it is the exact thesis Elbridge Colby tackles in The Strategy of Denial. It relies on a concept called differentiated credibility.
I'll be honest, differentiated credibility sounds like something you'd read in an economics textbook to cure insomnia. Break that down into plain English for us.
Fair enough. The premise is that the United States is not trying to conquer China, nor could it. The overarching goal of U.S. strategy is simply to deny China regional hegemony in Asia.
Because of the economy.
Right. Asia is the economic engine of the 21st century. If Beijing controls it, they dictate the terms of the global economy. To prevent that, the U.S. relies entirely on its Pacific Alliance network: Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines.
And China's goal is to dismantle that network.
Exactly. Colby calls it a focused and sequential strategy.
Why?
China wants to peel off American allies one by one. And Taiwan is the ultimate stress test for that. Even though Taiwan is not a formal treaty ally of the United States like Japan is, the entire region views it as the bellwether of American resolve.
I see. It's a domino effect of trust. If the United States abandons Taiwan or attempts to defend it and fails, leadership in Tokyo, Seoul, and Manila are going to watch that happen.
Yep.
They will look at a victorious, dominant China right next door and an absent, defeated America 10,000 miles away.
And they will rationally conclude that American security guarantees are utterly worthless. If Washington won't bleed to stop China from taking Taiwan, Tokyo knows Washington certainly won't bleed to stop China from taking the Senkaku Islands.
The whole thing collapses.
The entire alliance structure would instantly unravel. Those countries would realize they have no choice but to bandwagon with Beijing, effectively handing China dominion over the Pacific.
So what is the counter strategy? If the U.S. can't easily win a war there, how do they stop it?
Colby argues the U.S. must act as the cornerstone balancer. The strategy of denial isn't about fighting and winning a glorious war. It is purely about deterrence. It means the U.S. and its allies must build a military posture in the Pacific that is so lethal, so resilient, and so heavily armed that it changes Xi Jinping's mental math.
You want to make the juice not worth the squeeze.
Exactly. You want Xi Jinping to wake up every single morning, look at the invasion plans for Taiwan, look at the combined military might of the U.S., Japan, and Australia, and say, today is not the day.
Right.
Because Xi is ultimately a realist regarding his own survival. He knows that a failed invasion or a massive grinding stalemate that sinks his navy and isolates China's economy would likely mean the collapse of the Chinese Communist Party and his own downfall.
Right.
You prevent the war by making the risk of initiating it unacceptably high.
So, tying this all together, we started with a central question. Are the U.S. and China entering a classic military rivalry similar to previous great power competitions, and can it remain peaceful?
Well, the structural reality is undeniable. We discussed Graham Allison's work, Destined for War, and the concept of the Thucydides trap, the historical pattern where a rapidly rising power threatens to displace an established ruling power.
And that usually ends badly.
In the vast majority of historical cases, from Athens and Sparta to Britain and Germany, that structural stress results in war. China is the rising power. The U.S. is the established one. The tension we are seeing in the South China Sea and around Taiwan is the physical manifestation of that historical trap.
But the sources, particularly Kevin Rudd's The Avoidable War, make a compelling case that history isn't a suicide pact, right? War is not inevitable.
It isn't, mostly because of the realities of the nuclear age. Rudd advocates for managed strategic competition. Both Washington and Beijing possess massive nuclear arsenals. Both sides are acutely, painfully aware that a hot war between them wouldn't just be a localized naval skirmish.
No, it would be devastating.
It would trigger a global economic depression, fracture global supply chains instantly, and, risk nuclear escalation. It forces a certain kind of cold, calculating rationality on both capitals, even amidst all the posturing.
It's the ultimate paradox. I mean, the presence of these world-ending weapons and these hyper-advanced AI kill chains forces both sides to carefully manage the tension rather than let it explode. Every ship movement, every new missile deployed, every radar station built on a sandbar is a message in a high-stakes, incredibly dangerous dialogue.
Right. The Pacific is the most important military theater on Earth, precisely because it is the arena where this delicate balance of mutual deterrence is being constantly tested, probed, and calibrated.
We started today talking about the visible manifestations of power, the jagged silhouettes of aircraft carriers, the trajectory of hypersonic missiles, the physical dredging of island chains. But here is a final, lingering thought for you to ponder before we go.
It's a big one.
It is. We've talked today entirely about physical armies and physical geography. But what if the next great power war isn't decided by an amphibious landing or a naval blockade at all? What if the decisive blow is struck without a single ship leaving port?
That is the frontier we haven't even touched yet, the invisible battlefield.
Right. In our next deep dive, we are moving away from the physical realm. We are going to explore how China and the US are currently fighting a massive daily battle that you can't even see. How are these two superpowers competing for supreme power in cyberspace, developing artificial intelligence that could command battlefields autonomously, and waging a relentless global war for information and narratives? That is up next. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and as always, stay curious.